My guest tonight is a BC teacher who was fired for telling students the different side of the residential school story. I want to welcome everybody tonight to my guest, Jim McMurtry. Welcome to the show, my man.
Well, it's a pleasure, Clyde.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight. We're in a point in our country now where you can get fired for telling children about what actually happened in a situation, but to indoctrinate them about sexuality and stuff is almost seen as the correct or proper thing to do. It seems that that's the direction we've gone. Can you tell me your story? How did we get here? Why did you get fired?
Yeah, first of all, if I could just quickly say that if I were with my students pushing the idea that they should change their sex and become sterile for the rest of their lives and otherwise move toward a really dismal future, people would be thinking that I was doing a great job. What I did wrong, Clyde, was I told the truth, and I was walked out within half an hour of doing so. The subject is a rather sensitive one, Indian residential schools. And so in Canada, this is my feeling anyway, there are a number of taboo subjects. As a teacher, maybe starting, when Trump was elected, just mentioning the name Trump could get you in really big trouble, unless you just said something horrible and exercised for 2 minutes of hate. If you don't do your, use the proper pronouns, if you don't memorize the colors in the pride flag, there's all these rituals that are absolutely necessary for people to prove their membership in the woke cult. And it became very suffocating for me in recent years. So I was a teacher for a long time, and over 40 years. I was a principal for a time, and I feel that I did a good job. And so I was surprised that I was eaten up by the woke mob, and in the end run out of school. So the particular thing that lit the fire behind my immolation as a teacher was that I said to a class the day that news broke across Canada, maybe not the day it broke, but it was a Monday after the news broke of there being 215 dead children in a Kamloops residential school. And I studied that. It's an area of interest for me. I did a PhD in the University of Toronto in educational history and philosophy. So I know all about residential schools. Mm-hmm. Most of the teachers were highly devoted Christian men and women who'd come all the way from Europe to help, to devote their lives to raising Indigenous children into the modern world. And they have been accused, and now they're accused of having murdered not just 250 kids and secretly buried them in Kamloops, but to have done that in schools, residential schools, the last one closing almost 30 years ago, and having done this all over Canada. And there's not a speck of evidence that they're of a grave, an unmarked grave, a mass grave, or any teacher ever having murdered or tortured his or her students. It's not only is it not good for one's reputation as a teacher, but it's absolutely ludicrous to think that at one school that there could be that many murders and not a single parent said, "Oh, my child's missing." Not a single chief. The police have not investigated in Kamloops. The archaeologist's report is being sealed to the public for 3 years. No one's wanting to dig. It is very clearly a hoax, and yet it went around the world, and teachers like me get in big trouble. Again, I've lost my job for questioning this genocide narrative. And I use the word genocide purposefully because all the members of Parliament in our government and in Canada, the House of Commons in Ottawa, that they voted on October 27, 2022 to call the Indian residential schools a genocide. And now I'm at the point, I'm trying to fight what I consider to be a wrongful dismissal. And people are calling me, shouting at me, saying I'm a residential school denier. I'm equivalent to someone who denies the Holocaust.
Hmm. So what is first off, what's the story of the residential schools? So there may be people who are watching who haven't heard the story. A lot of people not from Canada watch the show as well, so they may not have heard what went down in Kamloops. But and what residential schools are. From my understanding, residential schools were for Indigenous. I'm not sure what the word you're supposed to use anymore. It keeps changing. Is it Native? Is it Indigenous? Is it? I don't know, right? And I'm not trying to be insensitive here. I'm really just trying to convey a conversation, like have a conversation. The policing of words has become too much. That it does complicate things. So the idea is that these residential schools were laid out for Native people in rural communities that didn't have access to formal schooling. So they would be able to send their children from remote areas to one central location, and then they would have these schools. There's letters and writing, historical reference that a lot of the bands wanted this, and they were happy to send their children to it. And then there's accounts that it was awful and it wasn't good for people. I suppose like people's experiences are different, case by case. Some I have heard stories of abuse that happened, and it wouldn't be unlike what happened in boarding schools or things like that. But the contention here is about a specific incident where hundreds of children were allegedly killed. And can you tell me more about that?
Well, it would be an honor. First of all, I love you, man. Everything you say, and you're very articulate, knowledgeable on the subject, and that pleases me greatly. I think children in schools have a right to know the truth, whatever that is. We have to work with established facts and not what the government wants us to believe, which is very 1984 today in our schools, where the answer to one's problems, if one's a little bit upset, maybe you should change gender. Or if you're not doing well in school, it's because the teacher thinks is treating you in a racist way. But anyhow, just all this stuff is coming down in this woke program. So I could just, from using my own words, but I won't do any better than you've already done, Clyde. So in 1871, in one of our provinces, Ontario, there was the first compulsory schools for kids. So the idea was to get everybody in a society in school, having an education and having those values and skills and so
this
forth.
You're talking about not for natives, you're talking about for just in general.
First compulsory schools in Canada were in 1871. It wasn't until 1920, 49 years later, and it wasn't enforced for another almost 10 years, that schools were made compulsory for the small part of the population that was Native. And I can use whatever name you want. In Canada, we tend to use Indigenous now, but Native, Indian, whatever people want to use. Allow me to Aboriginal. I will continue to use Indigenous. So that there's nothing wrong with making these kids go to school, because nobody's objected to that even to this day. Kids have to go to school. The problem was that many of these bands, as you said, were rural areas in the north and west of Canada, which even today is very remote, a lot of wilderness, a lot of areas where there's just nothing around. And some of the nomadic bands had as few, as 50 people. So how could you get teachers and build a school and anyhow? And they wouldn't be there long anyway because they're nomadic. So what they had to do, not in central Canada, not in the south, not in population centers, they had to find a place where they could bring kids to. So that was the residential schools. And sometimes Kamloops is just a city in British Columbia, but it's a small city in the middle of nowhere. There's just so much wilderness still left in Canada. So even though it was a small city, it was they had to bring kids from elsewhere in. So for a long time, the kids that were in those schools were kids that were put there by their parents. Parents had to sign an application form. And so the idea that it was equivalent to Auschwitz, to a house of horrors, where I've heard stories of kids hanging, kids being put into ovens, kids being put into electric chair, kids hanging, kids thrown into rivers, kids impregnated, their babies being burned. I've heard all sorts of stories. None of it is true. Over time, though, as we move into the 20th century, into the particularly into the early to mid 1900s, there were problems at the schools. The most obvious one were things like Spanish flu and particularly tuberculosis, which really ravaged society. And so obviously there was loss of life at these schools, as there were at any other schools. The important point is there are fewer kids that died from disease at these schools than died on the reserve. Another thing at the same time was that increasingly First Nations, well, again, I'll use the word indigenous, First Nations, Native, Indian, whatever, the indigenous communities were really falling apart. And that was to a large extent our fault, if our ancestors' fault, in the sense that a lot of immigrants came over here, and the indigenous people couldn't live as they lived before. They lived off the buffalo, but over time the buffalo got replaced by the cow, and which was able to feed many more people, of course. And so they were having a hard time. So their kids were being freely educated, either at a day school. They were never forced to go to residential schools, except for those that there was no day school possibility. But over time, as these communities broke down through alcoholism and just other unemployment, disease, and all sorts of other ills that were typical of society at the time, just poverty, that a lot of the kids that were being sent to residential school were kids that needed help. So they're the equivalent today of today's child welfare programs, ministries of that help children out who don't have what they need to thrive at home, and including many orphans. So the kids that were in residential schools over time, many of them were very needy kids, and that made it difficult as well. But these kids, in Kamloops, where I'm going to come to in a second, they had a swimming pool. They had international trips. They had grad events. They had dances. They had all sorts of different trade programs. They had academic programs. They learned English and math and science and all sorts of things. And many of them spoke about their time there as the happiest time of their lives. For some other children, I bet it was terrible, particularly those away from parents, particularly those that didn't have parents or didn't really have anywhere where they're getting the love that a parent would give. So I'm sure some of those kids had a really awful journey. And
I'm hearing mixed stories, right? So I just recently read Dr. Jordan Peterson's book, and he mentions a friend of his in his book 12 Rules. He goes much more into detail about it in his podcasts, but he talks about this man who now does totem poles. But he opened up to Jordan and talked about his time in residential school. And it was an absolute nightmare for him. It was a real nightmare for him. But not that there was no murders or anything like that. It was just it was an awful experience for him in particular. And then I have a super chat right now in the chat here. Light Giver for $10 says, Clyde, I had a friend who is a Mohawk and was placed with his brother in a residential school. He said it was hard at first, but having food every day and a warm bed every day won him over. He loved it. So there's like mixed. It doesn't seem like a consensus sort of idea here that it was awful across the board. Everyone was treated awfully. Maltreatment and abuse. We can understand that there could have been some abuses in this. So
I saying, man, this is great, and I like the fact that you're challenging me, and I really like what you just read as well. I would say schools today, not just residential schools, but regular day schools, you can find some kids that are so depressed, so unhappy with their lives that they kill themselves. The leading cause of death for children, if we include those who purposely kill themselves in car accidents. So I would say young people have a hard time wherever they are. You put them in a residential school, things can go wrong. That wouldn't go wrong in many households. But again, many of these kids didn't have a household to go back to. So I think if we understand that context, what's really important to me is is my story, and my story. Well, we'll come to it in a second here. But just while we're still on, and just such an honor to be with you, to say about residential schools. Why would Indigenous communities be fighting to keep the residential schools going right up until 1969, when many of them had already been closed? They wanted them. They were free. They provided, as that subscriber of yours indicated, they wanted regular food. They wanted an education. They wanted to be around friends. They didn't want the hardship of being on the hunt or living in a primitive hut through the winter. To have indoor heating and plumbing and all the good things that we had in our society starting more than 100 years ago, light at nighttime and so forth. So many of the kids were happy. Were all the kids happy? Of course not. And Canada has compensated. So for those that don't know this story about schools for Indians or Native people, for Indigenous people, it was certainly, the intentions were noble. It cost taxpayers money at a time. The taxpayers didn't have a lot of money. It was through a time where there were world wars and terrible epidemics and so forth, particularly tuberculosis here in Canada. And so, yes, it wasn't great. But the kids in the residential schools died at a much lower rate than on a reserve, because in the residential schools, they had access to doctors, nurses, and inoculation. So the idea that it was worse is just not supported by facts. So just people are going to have their own views. It's sort of like,
well, I want to add something to that, because we're fortunate enough to have a paper trail in history, and when there's a paper trail, it's great. So there were letters from parents when the residential schools were proposed to close. There were letters from Indigenous parents requesting begging that they keep the schools open. That was something that they felt was a benefit to their community. Now, that's not in every case, obviously, but there are cases where that was the case, and we actually have the letters still in parliamentary, the library, I suppose, wherever we keep that as a thing. But again, this wasn't a great experience for everybody, and that's true. And what am I getting at here? Like the real complaint today is a new complaint, I think. So at the time, the arguments that were given in those letters were, we were happy to have our children become literate. We want all the benefits of access to education, because it benefits the greater society, as well as our personal families and communities. That was the testament at the time, or the sentiment at the time in those letters. But now there's a different sentiment. The sentiment is that Indigenous people were subjugated, and they were taught to beat the native out of them, or this sort of concept of erasure of their culture, identity, and all of that. Is there any truth to that, or where do you stand on this?
I think it's complete nonsense, because you could say that about any school. That most of the kids I teach, Clyde, and again, I've taught for a long time. I choose to be in areas where there are very few white kids, because it's fun for me meeting kids from around the world. So I've been at many inner city schools where there's not a single white kid in most of my classes. These kids are coming from all over the world, and they're being forced to learn English, and they're being forced to adopt to Canadian cultural mores. They're being forced through peer pressure and all sorts of whatever, just sort of forces in our society to conform, to fit in, to get a job, to have a house, to have a car, to provide for their children one day. All these things still exist. So if you want to talk, if anyone wants to talk about, you made it's a great point you raised, by the way, but you want to talk about a cultural assimilation, that's still happening. My family's been in Canada longer than the Sioux, who came up from the Dakotas in 1877, longer than the Inuit. Many of them came more recently in the north. They exterminated the previous group that were there, called the Dorset. There are many native groupings in Canada, Indigenous groupings in Canada, who are more recent than my ancestors. The Vikings came, as you know, to North America, to Canada, Newfoundland, in around the year 1000 AD. That's over 1,000 years. I'm part Viking, of over 1,000 years that ancestors have been here. In every society, there's cultural assimilation. So I don't agree with it, but you're absolutely right. That's what they're saying. But here's a better response to that. I'm saying, but what choice is there? The only people that were able and equipped to educate these children, to do it for little or no pay, were Christian missionaries, like people in my family. There are 4 missionaries in my family not so long ago, including 2 great uncles. So what do? So yes, they were Christian. Yes, they would obviously encourage people to pick up the Christian religion. They thought it was better than what the indigenous people had. And that was the time. As a teacher today, I never assume that the way I live and the culture that I'm part of, the language I speak or whatever, is better than anybody else's. I might think myself, well, I prefer English to some other language, but I would never suggest to somebody else that my language is better. But I'm sure people did back then. But their intention was always to give these kids a better life. And the better life isn't English or French in Canada. It's not in a language that only 150 people speak in an isolated area. Another point that's really relevant here. If we didn't have these schools with their not just English and science and math, but cultural assimilation, there was some Christianization, there was some, obviously, kids being encouraged to cut their hair and wash regularly and wear certain clothes and brush their teeth and all these things that were part of our society. I would say that that's what their parents wanted. They didn't want that. So the moment people were closing these residential schools, they said they weren't great schools. Well, a lot of parents resisted that because they were going, well, what alternative exists? And even today, there are many students in places like Winnipeg, which there's a large Indigenous population north of Winnipeg in Manitoba, who fly into the city and are boarded and go to a local high school. Because even today, you can't have a day school because their band is too small. I live in Surrey, BC, and there's a group. It's called the Semiamu. That there are under 100 people on the reserve. How could you have a school on a band of under 100 people in the middle of nowhere, where the nearest store is 500 kilometers away? So yes, nothing is perfect, and the enemy is good is perfect, right? But they were good for the time. They were good, and we've improved upon. But the last thing that I hope we'll get to is my contention is, again, that these schools were well intentioned. They were certainly flawed, like all schools back in time. The government worked hard to improve upon them. They eventually got rid of residential schools altogether and put everybody in day schools. And so I'm not blaming the government. The next thing is the idea of cultural assimilation. We're dealing with that too. We recognize if a kid comes from Afghanistan or Poland or Rwanda, that we encourage that kid in some ways to hold on to his or her culture and religion and language. And we even have, where I live, there's immersion in Punjabi. Kids go to immersion, like French immersion, but they go Punjabi immersion and immersion in Mandarin. In other words, Canada is not a bestial society. It's a wonderful society, like the United States, that works hard to accommodate people from all over the world and serve people well. So yes, there's always going to be assimilation, and that's just the weakest argument in the world, and from my own view, because you can't have a society that functions unless people have shared values.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think honestly though, the bashing on Christians is it's a contemporary popular thing right now. You know, it wasn't always this case. I went to a Catholic high school and nobody thought anything of it. It was just a normal thing. I went to a regular public grade school, but then a Catholic high school. So what? I didn't come out feeling indoctrinated in any real sense of anything.
So but you know what, Clyde, on that note, The first hospitals, the first schools in Canada, the first programs of hygiene, everything that was done in early Canada for Indigenous and non-Indigenous was done by people like the Ursuline nuns and the Jesuits and all these other Catholics, and then over time other denominations. This country was built more than and by any other group by Christian missionaries. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that created written language. They still are working on written languages for Indigenous people. So all of a sudden, I found myself in a school 4 years ago. I moved schools and school districts. And I did that late in my teaching career because my wife has a sickness and she couldn't work anymore. So we wanted to move out and further away from the city. And so here I was, and I was in a place called Abbotsford and was very happy to do it. And I love so many of my colleagues and students and people that I have in the community. Nothing wrong with Abbotsford.
Before you get into telling me about what happened to you in your school, I want you to hit one more topic on this, and that's the specific case of the 300 some children. Why is it thought that there was a massacre? Why is there doubt that it ever occurred?
Well, but this is the whole woke program. So you have the left in Canada, the progressive left, people who started in the 50s and the 60s, French philosophers. I'll just try and simplify this, and then wanted to say our institutions aren't good enough. And we went through a long period in Western civilization. We're still in it, of introspection, of recognizing that we need to challenge and question our institutions, question authority. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. So in the 60s, as you know, people were wondering why Black people weren't given the same rights, why women didn't have the same opportunities. And so we've been in this flux. And I think many Canadians describe Canada as a project. It's not finished. It's just moving towards something better. And so that's really what the whole woke thing is. I don't condemn people who have different political ideology than I, but I think they're absolutely hideous and grotesque to bring this into the school, because you should never indoctrinate children. So they've been doing that. So they've got this idea, and they slowly captured schools and universities, as everybody knows. And what they're doing is saying Canada is crappy. We're racist, we're misogynistic, we're classist, we're all these things. What we need to do is what the communists did a century ago, which didn't work out very well. Oh. But what we need to rearrange society. We need a true cultural revolution. So it's very much Maoist, and maybe more Maoist than communist, with giving everybody not a little red book, maybe more of a green book with the whole Trudeau and his climate thing. But what it's doing is it's saying to everybody, you've got to be on the same page. And to get everyone on the same page, what we have to do is we have to strip down everything about Canada, about ourselves, about the Western world, about Christianity, about particularly straight white men, about all sorts of groups in our society, and they're the problem. And so we're going through this in schools where you go into classrooms all over the place. It says, white, cultural imperialism and oppression, and you go, where did this come from? Why would anyone want to do that? Mm-hmm. In the last few years, I've known more and more people who are saying terrible things about Christianity. And that was really hard for me to understand, because I was in Abbotsford, British Columbia, in the western part of Canada, where it was a Mennonite community, where a lot of Germans and Dutch came, and very Christian, hardworking, created a really thriving community. And I couldn't believe that one would want to say anything negative about the people who were in the majority in the community. So not that I would go by saying it against people who were only 1% of the community, but I just think, it would be dangerous for me to do that. So the best way of explaining it is I just say one more thing, is if you make everything look bad, then it's easy to raise yourself up, right? So we get one guy in particular, and his name's Trudeau. So he comes in and he says, our Canada was terrible in all these different ways. Mm-hmm. And he's really hitting on the Indigenous issue. We're just terrible, and we created genocide, because that's what's come out of his lips now. And then he gets to get on his podium on his white horse, and he gets to lead people as an ultimate virtual signaler towards something better. And it's him that's doing it. So we're going to make Canada better by giving up to now $4.6 trillion. And that's a figure that's being bandied about in many places. It's not just 30 to 40 to $50 billion a year. If you add that up, $4.6 trillion to one race, what represents a small percent of the population. So why do you do it? Because Canada, for a long time, felt badly about this is a group of Canadians who we supplanted here and had a hard time, and we want to do better by them, for them, and that's great. But it's got to an absurdity now, with the woke people like Trudeau who are wanting to say, no, we can even do more by saying how bad everything is. And the book that George Orwell wrote 1984 is all about that. It's about labeling school courses as racist. It's about firing teachers, getting rid of teachers, getting rid of evaporating people, about revising history, about changing it, getting people to forget how things work, getting people to completely have a new mindset. They even use the term reset. So what we're doing with kids in schools, we're programming them to think the body that they're born into is just a choice. That can be changed. They're taught that if they're Black or Native, then they're always going to be exterminated against. And if they're white, they're always going to be an oppressor. I could go on, the program, they're censoring literature. They're doing all these lowering standards, giving everybody A's. They're doing even ethnic marking. They're encouraging teachers to give higher marks to those in communities that have done less well. So you really try not to give scholarships to Chinese kids because they outperform a lot of other groups. So you and this is what they're doing in universities like British Columbia, UBC, where they say we're not going to make a lot of entrance requirements based so much on marks anymore. We're going to do it on resumes or whatever. What they're really trying to do is going, what religion, what skin color, what ethnicity, and my kids, they went into law, and when they applied for the University of Victoria, the application form was almost entirely one thing, which was what their ethnicity was, in great detail.
Do they honor trans ethnic people?
Well, Clyde. I'm earlier that I'm educated to be what I wanted to be, which is a teacher of teachers. So I said I got a doctorate, and I wanted to do that, and I never was given the opportunity. As hard as a straight white male, and it has been my whole career. I talked to a friend who works at Simon Fraser University, and he said, Jim, you can get hired there. They're looking in the education faculty where I would qualify. They're looking, but the person has to be transsexual.
That's absurd.
That's all they're hiring on. The merit is that there's no merit. It's simply, we'll get anybody that can say 3 words who's transsexual, and therefore someone can stand back and say, look at this faculty. We are intersectional, and we have equal representation of all groups. I'm not sure if they have enough left-handed people or people with whatever, 2 big toes. Right? But this is what we're getting to society where we're trying to, again, it's communist. We're trying to level everything in such a way that we're getting rid of the values, the academic values that guided us in school. And that brings us back to schools. So if that makes sense to you, that we want to, there's an appetite in schools to say the reason Black kids and Indigenous kids and other groups aren't doing as well is because the school system is rigged against them.
Well, it's a self-perpetuating, or it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in this whole thing. The way it's working in the United States with affirmative action, for example, for student enrollments to get in based on, quotas on race. So they have to have a certain amount of Black students. And the way that they do it is they lower the bar, and they allow admittances in that's aptitude in that field may not be up to par for that university, for example. Not that there are it's not that Black people can't do that. It's just that, and that's never the argument. It's just that if you lower the bar, what you're going to do is make the schooling so much more difficult for the people that you do admit. And then what happens is when those people struggle and say they can't perform and they can't get their way through school, they'll become a flunk or a dropout. And then and then the dropout rate seems like they're flunking black people more than any other people, and then on paper they can turn around and say, look, it's systemically racist, that's why the black people are, and it's like, no, you're not seeing, like, people really want everybody to succeed, and that's the goal, but these measures are actually doing the opposite of helping success. They're setting people up for failure.
But do they really want everyone to succeed? I think they want every group to succeed equally.
Well, I honestly believe that it's in the moment, they get the gratification of, I did something, like, look at me, and they could virtue signal over, look, I made it easier for, African Americans or natives or whatever. Look at me. It's a self-aggrandizing thing, and they'll get the immediate dopamine hit, or whatever you want to call it. But then later the success rate goes down, and they're the contribution to that, and that, it's harder to think more steps ahead. And this is why, emotional reasoning is not always the best practice, but it makes you feel good in the moment. And that's kind of where that is. We're veering off topic. I did want to get,
but you know what? As I'm talking to you, I feel I'm talking to someone who knows absolutely everything that's going to come out of my mouth and more. But I'm hoping that I'm being informative for people that might not have followed this as closely, particularly some people, as you're saying, they're following from outside of Canada, and many people that may not be from a school system or whatever, or be all that political. So I hope I've been of help there. But I just want to ask you about Trudeau. So Trudeau finds out that if you go into school, that the most honor rolls are filled with Asian kids. Does he go, oh, Asian, there's privilege? No, he doesn't. But he goes into schools, he goes, okay, the Asians are doing well. But the blacks and indigenous aren't doing as well. So the school is racist. Well, if the schools are racist, why are the Asian kids doing better? So next, another example, Trudeau goes and watches an NBA game, and 85% of the players are black. Does he sit there and he goes, well, that's racist? I don't see any Mexican players. I don't see any Asian players. I see very few white players, even though the majority still. Therefore, I'm going to make sure that we make it even for all the groups. This great communist plan of making every group equal, if not every individual, but certainly every group.
Well, they still have the merit of athleticism in the NBA. So the best athletes gets the job. Far none.
But this is what you're saying. You're just so dead right. What school only makes sense, and it's only fair. If I give your child, Clyde, who comes into my class, you're going to have two expectations of me. You're going to expect that I'm educating your kid, that kids not wasting any time with it, whatever it is. I teach French and English and history. The second thing you're going to be concerned about, particularly in the later grades, is that the mark is fair. You're going to be really unhappy. You don't mind if I give a kid 100%, but if I give your kid 60%, and the cutoff now for UBC or whatever is 88%, you're going to be unhappy with me. You're going to want me to understand that. Now, it's easy for me to say, look, Clyde, this is the work that we did. This is the evaluation we did. We had these essays and tests, and we had an exam. We had all these different things. Attendance was part of it, participation, projects, all these things. And we did all this varied assessment. This is the mark your kid received. I'm standing by it. I'm the teacher. There's things that you could do to support your child, but I'm not going to change my mark. That's not how it is anymore. I went into this new district in Abbotsford, and I had problems with some students who were complaining about their marks. And my colleague said to me, well, we don't really understand it. You're not giving tests, are you? You're not giving essays, are you? You're not evaluating. Just give everybody an A. And so the world's different. The world's different. And kids, English teachers, we used to read a book, every 3 weeks, a novel or whatever.
Yeah,
now
I remember.
You don't have to read anything. You can take grade 12 English. It can be it can be creative writing, so there's no reading. It can be radio. It can be what they call different names for it, but it can just be performative speech. It can be all these different things. It can be theater. My point is, we've lost not just academic values like competition and fair play and merit and hard work and all those things, but we've lost the whole sense of what's best, what we're preparing kids from. Because many of the kids that I teach in my last year before I was taught, I wasn't doing essays, I wasn't doing tests, I wasn't doing all sorts of things because I was so desperate to hold on to my job, because everyone was being scared that if you get any parent or any kid upset with you in any way. And so that maybe is sort of a nice segue to the next thing, which is my story, which is the
still want to get back to the massacre, what was alleged, and why do people think that it didn't happen?
And that's my story. That's part of my story. So actually, and I need you to challenge me.
Okay.
Because this is an emotional thing for me, because I've lost my livelihood at a time that my wife can't. And so it's a hard time. And now we're luckier than many, because we're older people and there's other things we can, I guess, draw on. But it's a very upsetting thing. And so there's an archaeologist who listened to a story from an elder in Kamloops. And of course, this is all over Canada about how terrible things are. It's broken telephones, the nun was, strapped me. My grandmother was strapped all the time. She was educated by nuns. And that becomes worse and worse and worse. And then eventually, kids were hanged and anyhow, electrocuted and all sorts of stuff, hit with cables. And I've heard all sorts of things. So an archaeologist goes into this and she hears stories about the past that some of the kids were missing and didn't return. But in Kamloops at the residential school, they kept careful records, because you got paid per child. So there was regular inspection. The inspector would come once a month, check up on the kids. The doctor would come once a month, the nurse once a week or something. So there was always people checking on every kid. There was never a parent again who said, my kid's missing, my kid's missing. The Kamloops residential school is right in the middle of the reserve. It's also in the middle of the city Kamloops, if you know Kamloops. So this idea that there could be 215 kids murdered and no one would ever notice is absolutely absurd. And by their teachers, wow. So all of a sudden she goes out there with a GPR, and she's very young and she's very woke. So
Explain
what I'm talking about.
What is a GPR?
A ground penetrating radar.
Okay. And
so there's little things that people go on beaches with, and they're trying to find a quarter or whatever. It's a little bit different, but it's a radar thing. And it all it does is it detects anomalies. If something is a disturbed ground underneath. And it could be a grave, but it could be 100,000 other things. And in Kamloops, what most people who've studied it, and I've been in communication with all sorts of anthropology and history professors. I'm part of a research group that's pan-Canadian, lawyers, judges, all journalists, all sorts of people that are like me, thinking this is just an absolute outrage to falsify history. That it's a 1924 sewage trench. They just sewage. All places have pipes going in and out of houses and buildings. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at where she said there were 215, they're all in a straight line. They're all evenly apart. And the reason she said, and others said they must be children, is because they were shallow. But that's not true. You never dig a grave 2 feet deep, because then animals will get at it. So that's why we dig 6 feet down.
I thought it's 5 feet in Canada. I thought that was
say 5 feet, but it's
okay.
not.
Yeah, no, I'm not challenging you on that. I heard that from someone.
You're a very smart guy. I want you to challenge me in everything, because that helps me out.
Okay.
Because I want to show you that I'm not a robot here, that I have a very deep understanding of this, because I've had very little to do for 3 years since I've been fired. So I've read a ton of books. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about Jordan Peterson, and I've read everything by anyone who's commented on this. And so people know that that's what it is. It's not rocks. It's not tree roots. It's a septic bed. And it's one that's just not used anymore. It's just left in the ground. And they're evenly spread.
Oh, I see. So a septic bed, that's where you would have some sort of bacteria or whatever to break.
No, they didn't pick up any haven't done any of that. That's interesting you say that. All they found, all they've done is radar that says that there's something in the ground that's not normal,
No, I mean
or that's
how a
being.
septic bed is aligned. So it would have you know, this, your septic whatever juices go into that, and then bacteria breaks it down, and that becomes the.
Sure, but I don't think it really releases that. My understanding is septic things. You run things through a septic bed, but you run it through a sewage pipe. Out of my house, we flush our toilet, and it goes all the way down to a septic, container somewhere, and then on and on to an even bigger one. So there was no release. There was no release. All I'm saying is it was shallow, and the only reason it was shallow is because this is what they have. Well, the easiest thing to do is to dig.
Yeah,
but they're not.
you would assume.
And the easiest thing to do is to say to the police to investigate. 215 kids were murdered. A lot of those teachers are still alive today. Go after them. The police are not investigating.
Wait, so this was supposed to be recent? This wasn't supposed to be 100 years ago?
Oh, okay. So this was supposed to be the school closed in 79. So it could be, so if you go 21 and 24, that's what is that? That's 45 years ago, right? So my point is some of the teachers could still be alive.
Right.
So if they're 215 dead children murdered, then you think you'd want to have accountability. The archaeologist report is sealed. Nobody can look at it. The community is not allowing anyone in. They're not even allowing people to fly over. You can't even put drones over, anything over. They have got it's a conspiracy by the whole Canadian government, in my view, in the sense that they've got every arm making sure that nobody ever digs. So you can't fly over the gravesite. The police are not going in. I've talked to the police. They give a standard answer because they're very nervous. They're saying that we've given the investigation over to the First Nation. And they go, oh, how often does that happen for murder? 215 kids getting murdered, that you go, oh, well, let the people who might have committed the murders investigate, because if it's right there in their community, maybe some of them are responsible if there's dead bodies. So why would you completely absolve yourself of responsibility for 3 years? Because this was reported in 2021. So the whole thing is absolute nonsense. But of course, right away the government gives them tens of millions of dollars, and then other bands go, oh, that's a good idea. So they start claiming the same thing, that they've got unmarked graves. And they've dug close to 20 different sites and reserves all across Canada, and they haven't found a single unmarked grave. Unmarked means that there wasn't something that nobody knew about the child being there. They haven't found a single body that wasn't accounted for. They haven't found a single child body where it wasn't supposed to be. So nothing, they just found absolutely nothing. But of course, during that time, the government's increased. And now we're looking at close to $500 million has been given to communities to go dig and dig and dig. So what they really want to do is give evidence, give some sort of foundation to their belief that we're a wicked country, and the Christian teachers in the past not just treated kids badly, but they murdered kids. And it's all we need to do now is find it, and then everyone will believe. But of course, they don't want to find it. And Trudeau goes to one of these places where they're going to dig up, and he puts in a big display in tears, and he gets a teddy bear, and he puts his knee down. Maybe you've seen this picture, and puts his knee down, his head down, and when he's got a teddy bear in his hand, and then there's dead kids underneath there. And then people say to the people there, this is a Catholic cemetery. He actually is right. There's a cemetery there. It has no association with a residential school. It had to send it to the community. There might be a residential school kid there, but because it's the community. But most residential kids died from disease, sometimes fire and accidents, but almost all from disease, most from disease. They're sent back to the reserve where their parents would want them to be buried. So there's just nothing to this story at all. And so challenge me on that. Say one thing to me, Clyde, that will suggest to any of your readers that this guy in front of you, who is educated, I'm a published writer for years and years and years, so I'm not a crank. And I was a teacher for a long time and a principal. I have a junior college. I'm not this crazy guy. And the people in my research group are distinguished people. including some people who, one person who, I won't start making names, but some prominent Canadians. And like Barbara Kay of the National Post, Tom Flanagan, who was Harper's chief of staff. And anyhow, they could go on. There are a lot of people in our research group who just can't believe that there's nothing. And they came to my aid and they asked me in the research group, and what's my credential? Why did they come to Jim McMurtry? Because I was fired for saying what they were saying.
Right.
There's no evidence of any of this.
So that's crazy. I mean, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we're getting none of that. So normally, if you had a claim, if there was any sort of claim similar to that, most people would say, well, provide proof. And before we have a national holiday over this. Like this is that Trudeau likes to go surfing on, apparently, and we have you know, the yellow shirt or the orange shirts and all of that stuff. Land claims. I think the land claims aren't well, maybe loosely tied to that. But now tell me your story. How did it come to the point where you got fired over this? Just for your commenting about the situation here.
Yeah, and just before I do, in response to what you just said, probably I would say 95% of if not 99% of all school children in Canada in the last 5 years believe that Canadian teachers, Christian teachers, murdered not 215 children, because they did a big commission in Canada. They investigated, and the person who headed that up was a guy named Murray Sinclair. And it gave us a report. We went from 2008 to 2015, gave us a report. And he said in his report that the number could be as high as 10,000 or 25. But he said as many as 25,000 or more could be missing. And missing means unnatural murder, hidden secret burials. So the story, one thing about the Kamloops, when it came out, they said that some of the children that they found were as young as 3, which makes no sense. Kids that young don't go to school. That they are secretly buried by 6-year-old students. The priests used 6-year-old students to do it. And anyhow, so all these, and a mass grave, and the New York Times, and all sorts of publications across Canada, which we won't retract, by the way. Nobody wants to retract the story. They just subtly changed to go from mass grave to individual graves to probable graves to potential graves to some people think are potential graves to it was said that some people believe there could be, if everyone were to dig, maybe not there, but somewhere else there could be. Anyhow, it's just,
so Winston Smith in the Ministry of Truth is busy ripping newspapers and putting new headlines. I see. Yeah. So anyone who's read 1984 knows they're
not asking people. What they're doing is they're doubling down in some ways and pretending in whatever, and oh, this is true. But really what they're doing is they're walking away for it and just hope everybody forgets. And that's 1984 as well, because what you want to do is destroy people's collective memory of anything. So they did a poll of Canadians, adult Canadians, about a month ago, and 60% of Canadian adults believe that the 215 children were found. And of course they found nothing because they're not even going to dig, and police aren't going to be involved. And 15 don't believe it. And then the rest aren't sure. So in other words, 4 times as many Canadian adults believe in something that's completely preposterous. To me, it's as absurd as flat Earth. And then, so that shows you how clever people are. And I saw that in schools when you're talking about with kids with the trucker convoy, all the truckers complaining about restrictive COVID measures. And we convinced so many people in Canada that these were evil, racist, misogynist people who wanted to just topple the Canadian government and commit all sorts of crimes. And of course, it turns out they brought their kids in many cases, and they had bouncy castles and pickup hockey, ball hockey. So the whole thing is absurd. So it just shows you how gullible people are. And the problem in my case is
people are ill-informed. They're absolutely ill-informed. This actually reminds me of a clip that just resurfaced of Trudeau when he was on his trip to Alberta recently. I'll play this really quick. This is really informative.
There is out there a deliberate, undermining of mainstream media. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts, the way, you know, the CBC and CTV, when they were our only sources of news, you know, used to and global used to project across the country at least a common understanding of things.
So this sounds like the common understanding, the common facts that have been projected on people, and then that sways their opinion. So you talk about this poll, 60% of people believe that this absolutely happened. Whereas once you start actually digging into it, like you said, it went from certainty to anomalies and a lot of different steps along the way. But it's the narrative that's most important, it seems like.
But politicians want to be, you said, ironically, you said when people start digging into it, my frustration, Clyde, is that they're not digging into it. Mm-hmm. Because I could be wrong. I'm educated enough to know that there's a lot I don't know, and a lot of knowledge keeps changing. We know more about history the further we get away from it. They could dig tomorrow in Kamloops and find 215 little children with stab wounds and whatever, and all of a sudden I'm wrong.
Yeah, and you'd have to accept that. You'd have to accept that and change your worldview.
I would willingly accept it because I have I'm not trying to impose any set of facts on anybody. I'm a truth seeker. I'm a teacher, and teachers aren't in the business. I tell my kids that 2 + 2 is 4. I know there's teachers now that are saying math is Western and it's racist and we shouldn't trust it.
That's crazy. I'm sorry.
Orwell had extraordinary. It was 2 + 2 was 5. So just my story. This is because I'm worried at any one moment all of a sudden I'm going to disappear from your screen. But I want to get to my story because I think it's the most of all, and it's very short. So, but we have the backdrop, and you've led me beautifully, and you've made sure that I don't leave things out, and so continue to do that.
I want the audience that's viewing this to understand the totality of the story, and so obviously, like, I'm trying to guide the conversation as much as I can. I don't want things to be left out, and there's things that I don't know that you're informing me of in this as well.
Oh, you know, one thing that I just challenge you on. It's not you personally, because this is my area. You're probably 10 times smarter than I am and everything else.
You speak too kindly.
I asked you to guess how many priests were convicted of sexual assault against Indigenous kids, because every Canadian school kid has been told that they are rampant with sexual abuse. That's a really terrible thing to say to kids in grade 2 and 4, to think that adult teachers whatever might sodomize them. Anyhow, so this is what we're doing. So I just like your viewers to know there are almost 150 of these schools, different numbers, probably the most precise 143, over 150 years. We'll go 150 schools over 150 years. Sex, not only murder and all this sort of stuff like Auschwitz, but the sex, man, it was just nonstop, raping kids, getting them to perform fellatio on them. So my question is, take a wild guess how many priests, because there were a number that were charged when this all started happening and they went after people. Guess how many were convicted, where there was evidence to convict?
I don't know the answer to that.
50 years. I went to a Tony private school in Toronto called Upper Canada College. And while I was there was a teacher who was sodomizing male students, because part of the school had a residence part to it. There are kids that came from other parts of Canada and the world in the school. There was a teacher who was a predator. And the only reason I learned about it is because the school is such a good school. The moment something happens, it just tells absolutely everybody. Because the best way for truth to be found, obviously, is if you put it in the light. Mm-hmm. So what the government's doing is keeping everything in the dark. The only thing buried in Kamloops and in residential schools is the truth. So here's my story. So I'm an educated, nice guy. I get into trouble because I don't like the land acknowledgements every day saying that I'm committing genocide, we're committing genocide. I don't like treating kids on the basis of race. I don't want to encourage kids to change sex. I don't want to do the things that they're doing. And I particularly hate they're getting rid of all the literature, all the good books. And now, as you know, in the news in the last week, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And they're replacing social justice garbage, claptrap, where white people are terrible and they do something terrible to some kid who's, you know, a BIPOC or whatever, and then the kid, you know, triumphs over it.
To Kill a Mockingbird was a great story of justice, like real justice.
I don't think the Americans are pulled on this sort of thing. What is their favorite book? It's not Moby Dick. It's not Huckleberry Finn. It's nothing social justice being produced. It's To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus Finch, Tom Robinson, and I think even more Boo Radley. For those in your audience who have read the book, those people are living to me, and I think to millions of others as models of how to conduct oneself. So maybe look at me a little bit. There's nothing special about me, but I've done one thing right. I've lost my job. I put myself in a predicament because they said my wife can't work because of health. I'm out of work, but I did the right thing and I'm proud of myself. So I tried. So the news broke in Canada, around the world, of a mass grave, and it was sort of like in Yugoslavia and Bosnia, or of course in the Holocaust, of all these. You just imagine the worst, and they were saying the worst, and they're all children. And anyhow, so they're saying this, and the principal gets on the loudspeakers, Robert Bateman, secondary in Abbotsford, British Columbia, and he gets on and he says, teachers, the news has been out since, you know, over the weekend, whatever. Can you talk to the kids about this? Because there's a lot of sadness and upsetness. We've got counselors brought into the school. They're really working the kids into a moral social panic. And can you talk about residential schools? So it was unscripted and it was compelled, which was fine because it was in the news. And I stood up there and I was teaching Calculus 12. Because here's a bit of humor for you. I always wanted to make the little things in life count. So anyhow, that's a joke about math.
That's a calculus, yeah.
In math, the principal says that. I'm a substitute teacher because I had to get away from my school because it wasn't going well, because I just hated the indoctrination. I was thinking maybe another school I'd be okay, and as a substitute teacher, they would not burn me. So I go in the school and everything's fine as a substitute teacher. And the principal asks that, and I go, okay. Part of me is getting nervous, but the other part of me is going, this is my area, man. I know Canadian history more than most because of my grandmother used to talk about history to me. Sit underneath, I think. So I said, well, that's easy for me to do. So I said to him, what do you know about residential schools? And the kids showed me, as most cases, that they knew very little, except for, of course, what I'm about to tell you. And I said, who ran the schools? And they said things. And I said, well, no, you're wrong there. Some kids said the government. I said the government paid for them and supervised it. But the schools were completely separate bodies. Some schools were great. Some schools were probably pretty bad. But a lot of that depended on all sorts of circumstances. It had nothing to do with the government. It hired a principal, it hired teachers, and hired Indigenous staff in many cases, as cleaners, as cooks, and so on. Anyhow, it just, here in the wilderness, do your best. And so we just talked about it. And they got a sense with me that I wasn't saying the right things. And they said, well, you're not talking about, you're just talking about the schools. You're not talking about all the murder and all that kind of stuff. And I said that the priest did. And I said to the kids, I said that I wasn't going to cast aspersions on any churches. I didn't think that was part of what I was asked to do, and I wouldn't do it. I don't believe that I need to say anything negative about anybody. So I'm not going to talk about the churches outside of the fact that they operate the schools. What I want to say here is just what the residential schools were meant to do. And then some kid interrupted me and said, "Oh, it's cultural genocide." And then all of a sudden, they had a lot to say. So they knew nothing about the schools, what they did. They just knew about all what's being said.
The allegations. They just knew the allegations.
The ghost story. They know the ghost story. And so they said this, and one kid said cultural genocide. And I'm going, I'm thinking self-preservation. I said, yeah. See, as a teacher, you never really tell kids they're wrong. That's bad teaching.
Right.
You find thing they said and you build on it. And I said, well, you're not wrong. I said, I may not use that term myself, but it was forced cultural assimilation. And I thought she was satisfied with that because these kids were being brought into an alien world, and some of them were sent, away from home to do that. So anyhow, she seemed content, but she was challenging me, and then I kind of was getting nervous. And then another kid was really stirring, and she said, "You're not saying that it was about the murder." And I said, "Well, what do you understand? What do you understand about the news, about finding this mass grave and stuff?" I said, "I don't really know much about the news. But what do you understand it to be?" Because I just had heard about a mass. I didn't really know much about this thing, about the precise details. And said, "What do you understand?" And I said, "All I can speak about is residential schools generally. And that generally, right across, it was those who were enrolled and died did so from disease, particularly tuberculosis." She went so angry, and she looked at me and she said, "How dare you say the priests, they tortured and they murdered kids and they left them out in the snow to die?" And I said, "I think we need to move the conversation to somewhere else." And I said, "Well, just allow me to make this point." And I talked about 100 years ago, 150 years ago, there was a lot of death in these schools and in regular society. And I said, it'd be 1 in 5 children wouldn't make it to age 5, just 100 years ago. And so I said, at that moment, Clyde, I thought my job was to take them down from the ledge. There was so much indignancy and anger toward people like me, I was a substitute teacher, so I was a stranger, this old white guy, and standing over them, and to them, I was denying the genocide. So within half an hour, I got a knock on the door. 2 male vice principals came up and said, "Get your stuff." I didn't know it. We kind of ended the conversation. I thought things were fine, gave the kids a little bit of a break. And then all of a sudden I was being let out of the school. I said to the vice principals, "What did I do wrong?" I didn't know. I really didn't know what I had done wrong. I knew I'd angered a kid, but I tried to kind of patch that over. I thought everything was fine, but I guess it wasn't. And she complained to the guidance counselor, who called to talk to the principal, and he called the school district. And all of a sudden I was being frog marched out. I got to the front door, and I used to play high level rugby, including international tournament. And I said, "I'm going to make this easy for you guys. You let me talk to the principal, and I want to know why I'm being let out. And then I'll leave gently." And they allowed me to do that. And the principal said something completely inane. Said, "Oh, it was nothing you said. It was just they didn't know you because you're a substitute teacher."
No, it gets frog marched out for that.
Yeah. But this is my thing is, and the next day I was suspended, and which was for 8 months. I haven't worked since. And no one there in the Abbotsford School District has been willing to have a conversation with me. And I have nobody on my side. My union all believes in this stuff. They have told teachers as recently as last September 30th, the national holiday, and remember all the kids that were in these unmarked graves and died. And, like everybody's still playing this idea. The union, my employer, obviously, the government, the regulatory body that wants to ban me for life, which is inevitable. And of course, newspapers, everybody was going, "How dare you go against?" It's like being in Putin's Russia and saying the word war and not special military operation. All of a sudden you're being marched off to jail. And this is how I felt, and how I still felt. So that's my story. So I had 2 choices, Clyde. I had 2 choices. I was told by my union, if I wanted to teach again, to take a knee, mea culpa, to show that I'd done something wrong in one way or another. And I said, "But I haven't done anything wrong." I told them the truth, which is they died from disease and not murder. And that wasn't enough, but they supported me. My union's got a lot of nice people in it. And they convinced others to say, "Look, he's still a teacher. He didn't say anything that was wrong. Support him." But even today, I don't feel that I have the support from anybody except for my wife and son. and people in the research group, and then people, I have over 10,000 followers on Twitter, and I get support there from a lot of strangers. But in my life, my colleagues, my students, we're in Abbotsford, people I work for, my government, all sorts of other people that I've appealed to, whether it's trustees or ombudsmen in BC, members of parliament, everybody doesn't care about me. But so I had a choice. Just saying that I did something wrong, that apology, and then all of a sudden everything's forgotten, and the woke mob moves to its next victim, right? Because they're like a medieval mob out in the street looking for someone to burn. That's from Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean. So they're going to, but they needed to take a piece out of me. And I said to them, as I'm saying to you now, I don't lie to students.
So did they tell you that, you know, if you took the knee, everything would go back to normal, you'd be able to have your job back? And
still telling me that. They're still telling me that. Because they're
Do you believe that? Do you believe that even if you were to succumb to that and go with their will, that you would even, because I've seen this time and time again, people get canceled and then they kowtow. And like, I'm not even using that as an analogy. I'm like literally using the language of the Chinese communists, kowtow to this struggle session that you're going through. Like literally, you're going through a struggle session. They want to shame you. They want to put you in your place and force you to make their opinion. Now, I like the fact that you do say you could be wrong. And if you're wrong, obviously you change your worldview about this. But
that's what science, that's what science is. It's humility.
Mm-hmm.
It builds on you stand on the shoulders of giants, and someone's going to stand on your shoulders one day and see things differently or better. I have nothing that's absolute in my belief system. As a teacher, kids have a right to know, to the best of my teacher's ability, the goods. Whatever that truth is, whatever that science indicates. And now they're saying, no. We have indigenous knowing, and that's equivalent, if not better, than science. It's interesting, during COVID, people weren't running to people on reserves saying, help me, I've got COVID, find a solution. But they're doing that in schools, because they have to so much discredit everything about people like me. Old, white, male, straight, Western, Christian, all these things. Christian family. I'm not going to say what I am philosophically or religiously. I'm just simply saying from a Christian religion. But my tradition, all I'm saying is they want to stain all that. And then Trudeau, of course, gets his votes from the Muslims and the other minorities. He knows what to do.
Well, he's losing them too. So he's losing all of them as well. So
because that's what happens when you go woke. You go broke.
Mm-hmm.
You really do, because you divide people. And eventually enough people once you start doing that, you go for you pretend you're there for the Jews, you pretend you're for the Muslims when they start fighting with each other. Or when the indigenous people start lying themselves with Hamas terrorists who tie women to trees, rape and kill them, then you got a bit of a problem, because you don't really want to associate with both those groups. So what do you do when you have indigenous people or marching with Hamas supporters in Toronto streets or Vancouver streets? So this is complicated. The easiest thing to do is just tell the woke people they're absolutely lunatic to divide people and to think that people should be judged on basis on the outward characteristics and not by what's inside them. And that's what Kill Mockingbird, we talked about earlier, teaches. Mm-hmm. It's all about character. That's what Martin Luther King taught us. So the whole thing is just that woke people 10 years from now will pretend they were never woke, because they're going to be derided, mocked. They'll be laughed at.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cultural contagion phenomena that we're going through right now. And people are becoming quite prejudiced about it. It's obviously they're not prejudiced. Well, I mean, yeah, they could be prejudiced for those reasons, but prejudice against anyone who doesn't fit their ideology. There's that what a lot of people are bringing up. We want diversity, but what about the diversity of thought, the diversity of belief systems, the different things that we all believe. I mean, when I was growing up, for example, I grew up in Windsor, Ontario, and it's a hotbed for immigrants. My parents are immigrants. I don't consider myself like old stock Canadian or anything like that. My mom's from Scotland. My dad's from America. I'm a first generation born here Canadian, and I grew up with a lot of people whose parents came from all kinds of places who are in the exact same position as me. They were born here, that sort of thing. But the 90s were a different time. We were trying to bring people together in the 1990s. That was a totally different thing. It was all about sharing each other's culture, but all under one umbrella. We're all community in Canada, and we all work together. And that was the whole concept then. This woke ideology is different. It's about recognizing those differences, but then using them as reasons to pit each individual group against each other individual group. And it's awful. It's tearing Canada apart. And this is just one more example of what that looks like, the tearing apart of people in our society.
And I love what you said earlier, that so for your international audience, so now this fake event of finding, they didn't find anything, and there certainly never was murder, even if they found anywhere, somewhere, and it's a national holiday. And after they apparently found the graves, they put the national flag down for over 5 months, and Trudeau's just eating it up and going, look at me, I'm going to make things better. All the other prime ministers before me we're just horrible racists toward Indigenous people. So, but I'm different. Look at me, vote for me. I'm something special. And where does he go on the second anniversary? He's, as you said, he's surfing into Tofino, but telling the media that he's in his office in Ottawa working.
Yeah, lamenting what happened in Canada's history.
Yeah, mourning over the terrible thing when he's out, partying. Like the whole thing is there's nothing. This is just politics is smoke and mirrors, but teaching shouldn't be. That's who I represent at this moment, because I think I'm the only public school teacher that anyone knows is being fired for saying the truth. Because something else about me, is nobody was going to go, oh, he had bad lessons, or kids didn't like him, or he doesn't know his subject, or he's this, that, or something else, or he's a drunk, or like there's nothing outside of the fact that I said, kids, is my understanding that those that died did so from disease, particularly tuberculosis. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I'll ever teach again. It's been 3 years, and everybody's saying I'm done. I'm getting to the point where I go, yeah, my union years ago was right. It was the hill I was going to die on, but it really is a little different. My career died on that hill, Clyde, but I didn't die on that hill. I'm stronger today than I was 3 years ago because I understand myself a little bit better. I'm a good teacher. I did the right thing by telling the kids the truth. So, yeah, I wouldn't do anything differently.
You sound like a good man. That's an incredible story. A really incredible story.
Can I just, before you go away from this, Atticus Finch, he risked his own life. He risked the life of his children who were almost killed by Bob Ewell. He saved, his kids were saved, as you know, by Boo Radley. Atticus Finch kept trying to understand what was the right thing for him to do. His kids' safety, what was right for the community, what was right for the society, what was right for him personally, what was right for the share. We all have to do that in life. And so I was put in a situation where I decide for myself. And I think I did what Atticus would be proud of me for having done.
Amazing.
And now people read that book because these woke idiots have found a word, or they found, it's a white savior. He's a good character, but he's white. So we don't want that in our literature the kids are reading. So you get rid of the best book. To me, it's the best book. If it's the most popular, the most loved book, that to me is the best. Because reading isn't about War and Peace over 600 pages, or Northrop Frye reading, the code or something that few people can understand. The best books for me are the ones that transport the most people into a world of fantasy and delight and good education and edification. That book should be in every shelf, in every school, in every home. And it's now, as though it's wicked people only would be having that book.
And now children are reading drivel. I mean, what else could you call it? What else can you call it? Yeah, I remember having to read a lot of these books and found it fascinating as a kid being introduced to this stuff. Of course, I had to read Margaret Atwood too, and I'm just not a fan. I'm just never a fan. Just her descriptive writing, just really okay. 5 pages of what the mantle looks like. Yeah, thanks. That's besides the point. I wanted to get to some of the super chats of people that were asking questions, making comments while we were speaking here. Sorry, I have to find my place. Okay, Gary Krell, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, with a $10 super chat. Sorry, I have missed the teacher's name, but that's Jim McMurtry. Is that correct? How you pronounce that?
Yeah, and you've got it. Can you put it on your screen, my Twitter, and any possibility?
I can pop this
yeah,
up. So
I is Jim. I'll lower score Jim McMurtry 01.
Okay, Jim McMurtry 01. Yeah, go over on Twitter, give a follow. For the live audience right now, I'll put the link in the chat so everybody can go over, give a follow, as well as people that are watching this after the fact, because I know last week's live stream, 20,000 people watched the live stream afterwards. So just know that a day later, there will be an active, a replay of the chat as well next to the video. So you can see the chat that's scrolling. You can't use it, but you can view what people were talking about after the fact. So go in there, you'll see that as well. If you're watching the video as a republished video, I'll make sure that all the links are in the description down below. So go check that out. And yeah, give a follow over there to Jim. Let's get to some more of these super chats as well. Sorry. So he said, sorry, I missed the teacher's name, but he should know that the majority of Canadians stand with and behind him. Do no harm should be a teacher's oath as well, not just doctors. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Oh, what did I lose, Jim? Oh, I hope not. Oh, no, just lost you for a moment there. You're back. Okay, gets us more of these. Mr. Roscoe Pico with a $5 super chat says, I was put in group homes. It wasn't great. 17 hours locked in a room when you are 12. I'm not Indigenous, so it still happens. So, yeah, some people have had some really bad experiences just with schooling and education in general. And it's always horrible to hear that people have awful experiences, but I don't think it was just the residential schools that people are having these bad experiences in. This name cracks me up every time. Justa Dildo, spelled like EAU with the Justin Trudeau sound, with a $5 super chat. Candace Malcolm did several deep dives into the Kamloops residential school fines, answered loads of unanswered questions that mainstream media omitted. That's correct. She has written several articles on it. She's done several videos on it. Go check out True North. They're doing a great job with the news. Penny D with a $5 super chat. God bless you, Clyde. God bless you, and God bless everyone in the chat, and Jim here for what he's doing and standing on this hill. So many of us don't have to. Really, what you're doing is brave. It really is. And this gets into the next super chat from Tamara Leach. She says for $6.99, thank you, Jim. This is an important untruth that must be corrected. You are a brave man. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Jim, so much for joining me this evening. You know, it's kind of a to-do to set up the video and make it all happen and come in and share your story as well. Put this much time out of your day to express this story, and it's a heart-wrenching one, and I'm sure it's really tough to talk about. Oh, you've gotten muted. We've lost your audio, Jim. No, no, it's not. I don't know. Something happened. You dropped out for a moment before, and then it came back. I'll let Jim figure that out. As soon as I can hear him, I'll let him know. But that's technical difficulties. These things happen. It's amazing. Unfortunately, you can't hear him at the moment. But just what an incredible story to hear. And I don't know how to express this. Hopefully, okay, I see him back here. Hopefully it's come. I'm gonna have to bring him back into the chat just so we can finish this off, because I want to make sure he gets every last word that he possibly can before we close out the stream. And for all those people out there as well that are tuning in, if you want to carry on the conversation, we'll be in the Discord afterwards. Come meet us in there. Usually have some pretty engaging conversations there. The link is in the description down below. Jim, I think you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you. Got you back. Sorry, technical difficulties. It happens. These are things.
It's very funny because my son, who's just being such a wonderful supporter, just called me. So that's what messed everything up, because he probably want to know how excited for me that I'm with you, Clyde. So
not knowing that it messed up the call. That's funny.
But the one thing that just I love to address, and you can cut it away, but the one person saying to you that, being locked in a room for 12 hours, and I think it's wrong to deny anybody's pain.
Absolutely.
At any time. But what's happening here is there's a lot of money associated with saying you've had pain. And during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and that long parade across Canada, there were lots of people saying things that weren't true to get money. And again, only one priest was ever convicted, and not many were ever charged. So it just tells you that there's been a lot of inflation, and I understand human nature is such. But I just want to say, my wife, who's same background as I am, mostly Celtic, Scottish, Irish, little English, a little bit dab of this and that, and Viking and so forth. She said that
mixed race, you would say.
Yeah. Mixed race. Yeah. There's lots that used to say to people that I come from a mixed race family. My mother used to be a sprinter, my father a long distance runner, but but we're all mixed. And the reality is, it's just absurd. I did my DNA test, and I'm 2.7% Neanderthal. My son's DNA test showed that he's 0.1% West African. And he's also, which is really kind of interesting, he's also Siberian indigenous, very small part. So we're all of everything. And it's just, but the one person said something that really struck about the fact that I don't deny the pain. Obviously, some kids had a horrendous experience. Obviously, it was wrong in many ways. And I'm sure that the government and every realm of life did lots of horrendous things back in time. But I just want to mention my wife, and that is that her grandmother, whom I met and loved, was an orphan. So it was a very sad start to life. She never knew her mother or father. And the only people that were willing to take care of her were Christian nuns. So the very people that were condemning in Canada, who were involved in residential schools, half the teachers in Kamloops were nuns. But these nuns, they looked at my wife's grandma at a young age, and they felt there's something wrong with her. So they never gave her an education. They had her working in the laundromat. So she did laundry until the age of 15, I think, until she literally was old enough to leave. And she married the first man that she met, which was my wife's grandfather, and moved to meet him in Canada. So because she was in an orphanage in Ireland. A lot of people have had sad lives. Mm-hmm. I think what we want to do is honor everybody, including Indigenous people. But we, at the same time, have to present the past as it was. To falsify, to destroy statues, as people are doing in Canada.
Yes.
To rip art, as someone did in Britain the other day, as far as the climate protest. To destroy, like the Taliban in Bamiyan, as you know, in Afghanistan, the Buddhist sculptures that were so big and did it because they only wanted to pretend that there was only ever Islamic culture in Afghanistan. People that do that rob all those that come after us of the right to know what the past was. I think people who revise history are criminal. And the fact that everyone around me, and all the classrooms around me, and all the schools, and all the board offices, and all the government offices, and all the political offices, everyone around me 3 years ago saw me as somebody that they had to eliminate. And yet, I'm Winston Smith. I'm the one person who's going, no, I remember reading that. I remember it wasn't that way. That London, England was kind of a nice place to live. And anyhow, so this is a very dangerous thing. The woke program.
So Winston Smith, I hate the spoilers, but his story didn't end well.
Mine hasn't either.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I'll never teach again. What did I do with my life? I thought I'd be a good teacher. And to be walked out in front of my students with their mouths open and going, what's happening here? So no, it didn't end well for me, but I'm fine. I'll figure things out.
Well, that segues really well into the next super chat. Kenzie Kraken for $5 says, does Jim have a place to donate to assist with his legal battles? Is there somewhere where people can help you out with that?
You know what? You offer me money, and including one older woman from northern BC who said that she didn't have the money, but she still wanted to send me money. I sent her the check back. I'm doing this entirely on principle.
Wow.
I refuse to dime from anybody, and I never will. I'm doing this for the students who have a right to know the truth about the past. But thank you.
Absolutely. No. Sarah Allen with a $6.99 super chat says, there's a large homeschooling community that would love having Jim. I wish I lived closer. Thank you for sharing your story and fighting for the truth. Have you looked into any of these other alternative places you could teach, not just through the unions?
To be honest with you, I think I have a higher purpose right now.
Okay.
I think I'm making a difference, and people like you are allowing my word to get out. That there's a problem in schools. The kids are being indoctrinated and not educated. And in my particular, obviously, example is that kids are being lied to about the past and about their ancestors. And so I'm full-time on social media, writing articles, writing tweets, and talking to a lot of teachers who are being beat up, and helping them out. So right now I'm feeling it's full time, and so I'm fine. I'm doing something that never wanted to be doing. To be honest with you, I wanted to be teaching, but I think in some ways this too is teaching.
Yeah, I mean, this just tonight was a huge lesson for so many people. You've opened up so many eyes, I'm sure, just this evening. Pleasantly Blue for $10 says, Paul Revere and the Raiders Indian Reservation song. It tells it like it is. I'm not familiar with that. I don't know if you are. As well as Michael McLean for $2 says, historical revisionists cause actual genocides. Yeah. I've been reading a lot about the article or the Elders of Zion propaganda thing that came out years ago, and the origins, where it came from, and how it was a fabricated piece of work to demonize an entire race of people. And that just reminded me of that. Been doing some research about that specifically, because it seems to be coming up again another time, and largely to demonize a particular group in society, which we ought not be doing.
That person, historical revision is violence, because they're going to be resistors. And that's like communism. You can't take away the money from the wealthy or the farmers like the kulaks and not end up killing them because they're going to resist.
Right.
So no, I think historical revisionism is as dark as any practice, because what you're doing is you're also performing a blood libel against dead people who can't come back, like Christian nuns and priests who taught in those schools. You're calling them murderers without them having the right. You're bearing false witness against people who have no ability to come back and say, no, we love those kids.
Incredible. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Jim. It's so refreshing to have somebody come out and just say it how it is. It's not a lot of people doing it. Let's just say that. I want to thank everybody, obviously, that came out into the chat. Hang on the line. I still want to chat with you. Don't hang up the call. I'm just going to end the live stream. Everybody, thank you so much for coming out and tuning in. This is an extra long one. It went longer than we normally go, but keep the conversation going as long as the conversation is turning out new information, and you know, I feel kind of devoted to bringing these stories to people, and I thank you so much, Jim, for coming again to bring this story to so many people.
Thank you,
everybody. We'll see you Monday. Keep on trucking.